Nor does America have any interest in Syria beyond the well-being of its people, the stability of its neighbors, the elimination of chemical weapons, and ensuring that it does not become a safe haven for terrorists. America's committed over $1 billion to this effort. Today, I can announce that we will be providing an additional $340 million. No aid can take the place of a political resolution that gives the Syrian people the chance to rebuild their country, but it can help desperate people to survive. Ultimately, this is the international community that America seeks. One where nations do not covet the land or resources of other nations, but one in which we carry out the founding purpose of this institution, and where we all take responsibility. A world in which the rules established out of the horrors of war can help us resolve conflicts peacefully and prevent the kinds of wars that our forefathers fought. A world where human beings can live with dignity and meet their basic needs, whether they live in New York or Nairobi, in Peshawar or Damascus. These are extraordinary times with extraordinary opportunities. Thanks to human progress, a child born anywhere on earth today can do things that 60 years ago would have been out of reach for the mass of humanity. I saw this in Africa, where nations moving beyond conflict are now poised to take off. And America's with them, partnering to feed the hungry and care for the sick and to bring power to places off the grid. I see it across the Pacific region, where hundreds of millions have been lifted out of poverty in a single generation. I see it in the faces of young people everywhere who can access the entire world with the click of a button, and who are eager to join the cause of eradicating extreme poverty and combating climate change, starting businesses, expanding freedom, and leaving behind the old ideological battles of the past.
My name's Daniel Bushaw. America's great power status exposed as a great fraud. Coming up.
America has the worst infant mortality, the highest child poverty, and the least freedom. Shocking new research. Why kids in the States grow unloved. And no more tax in the U.S.
We are the United States of America, the greatest country on earth.
Traditions that continue to transform our great nation.
Mainstream media is feeding a great lie. On all key indicators, America is now one of the most underprivileged countries in health, including infant mortality, hospital beds per population, and survival past middle age. America's 28th from 30, fighting for last spot in the OECD with Mexico, Hungary, and Turkey.
That's an immoral question amongst the in a humane society, to ask that question. Where's the profit here? How is this going to affect our bottom line? How are we going to make money off this sick person? This doesn't look good, folks. It doesn't look good to the rest of the world, and it won't look good to the anthropologists who dig us up hundreds of years from now. They'll wonder, what were these people thinking? What were they?
The US is the most dangerous place to live. The most HIV, drug abuse and violence in the West puts it dead last. As for generosity,
we have done more good on this earth than any other nation in history.
Humble Bill O'Reilly claims America's the most generous nation on the planet. In fact, America is the meanest, the least asylum seekers taken, the worst environmental damage home and abroad, and the least foreign aid. On freedom,
these people who hate us because of the freedoms that we have.
So-called land of the free is nothing of the sort, with officially the least press freedom, more corruption than Uruguay and Barbados, lowest political participation, lowest proportion of women in politics. On human rights, world ranked 167, and by far the world's most prisoners. Finally, family.
To try to promote this institution of marriage, try to promote the family.
Republicans especially talk family like they invented it, yet their policies in particular give America the lowest child benefits, in the developed world the most horrific child poverty, and 1 in 2 teens without mum and dad. Seeing married role models like Bill O'Reilly in sex pest lawsuits doesn't help. At least the US had the biggest economy, till now. the first time ever, most Americans think China has already overtaken them. The mainland became the world's biggest trading nation last week. America's losing 500,000 jobs to it every single year. US is still #1 in income inequality. A shocking new report shows through the crisis, the insanely rich have actually increased their fortunes at the expense of the 99%. The wealth gap's now at its highest since the Great Depression. Economists have long warned America's system is a limited stage of history. Stage 1 has freely competitive markets. Monopolies develop at stage 2 as oligarchs go criminal. In one notorious example, General Motors joined the mafia to buy America's flourishing railroads, then let them rot. We're now in the last stage called late capitalism, where banks and corporations turn on ordinary people with useless, even harmful products, till the shocking disparities between a tiny elite and the rest hit boiling point. But an astonishing study shows Americans have had enough. A stunning 92% of the entire population say they want the Swedish model of income equality over the lopsided US one. Most surprising of all, the quest for parity runs equally through all social lines, Democrats and Republicans, old and young. Psychologist Dr. Ryan Howell, you make the 92% right. In the first comprehensive meta-study between money and happiness, you found the chase to catch the mega-rich is turning people deeply miserable.
The United States has won, by and large, is the wealthiest country in the world, though is not really ever very close to being one of the happiest. Yet it too has a high rate of suicide. Spending your money on bigger and faster cars, bigger and faster computers, larger houses, more clothes, that those things, after your basic needs are satisfied, play a very, very small role in actually making yourself happier. And so I think the simple explanation is that the reason there's a small correlation between money and happiness.
Global happiness charts are regularly topped by Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, Sweden. Income's taxed to 60% with extremely generous benefits for all, including 14 months of paid maternity leave. Just 5 underprivileged countries in the world, Lesotho, Liberia, Papua New Guinea, Swaziland and the USA, give mothers nothing at all.
So let me take this opportunity to outline what has been U.S. policy towards the Middle East and North Africa, and what will be my policy during the remainder of my presidency. The United States of America is prepared to use all elements of our power, including military force, to secure our core interests in the region. We will confront external aggression against our allies and partners, as we did in the Gulf War. We will ensure the free flow of energy from the region to the world. Although America is steadily reducing our own dependence on imported oil, the world still depends on the region's energy supply, and a severe disruption could destabilize the entire global economy. We will dismantle terrorist networks that threaten our people. Wherever possible, we will build the capacity of our partners, respect the sovereignty of nations, and work to address the root causes of terror. But when it's necessary to defend the United States against terrorist attack, we will take direct action. And finally, we will not tolerate the development or use of weapons of mass destruction. Just as we consider the use of chemical weapons in Syria to be a threat to our own national security, we reject the development of nuclear weapons that could trigger a nuclear arms race in the region and undermine the global non-proliferation regime. We stand ready to do our part to prevent mass atrocities and protect basic human rights. But we cannot and should not bear that burden alone. In Mali, we supported both the French intervention that successfully pushed back al-Qaeda and the African forces who are keeping the peace. In Eastern Africa, we are working with partners to bring the Lord's Resistance Army to an end. And in Libya, when the Security Council provided a mandate to protect civilians, America joined a coalition that took action. Because of what we did there, countless lives were saved and a tyrant could not kill his way back to power.
My name's Daniel Busher. We expose the 3 tricks of war coming up.
Plans to split the whole Middle East into microstates. A policy called Kill Anything That Moves. And Hollywood goes too far.
Doesn't he ever give up? He'll not trick me into those hills again.
Fairy tales, you get caught for crying wolf. In real life, insiders laugh how people fall for false flags time after time after time.
Crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. That explosion on August 17th, we could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall we had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode.
I want to thank all who are doing outstanding work on this issue.
Trick 1. Repeat the lie. The White House's preferred month for invasion is March, and its weapon of choice is the New York Times. Anonymous White House official tells the Times Iraq's buying WMD tubes. Mainstream media repeat without question it was a total lie. On the 2nd anniversary of Syria, anonymous White House official says Iran's buying WMD rings, even though all 16 US intelligence agencies admit Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. Anonymous White House official tells the Times Iraq's about to use chemical weapons. It was a lie. Anonymous White House official tells the Times Syria's about to use chemical weapons. Mainstream are repeating it without question. We're even told things that don't exist. Iraq supposedly had some chemical Agent 15. It was a lie. In 2013, CIA claims a, quote, compelling case. Syria is using the same thing now. The only problem is there's no such thing as Agent 15. A leaked email says America is trying to plant a chemical weapon, which Washington says would justify invasion.
We've got a new offer. It's about Syria again. Qataris propose an attractive deal and swear the idea is approved by Washington. We'll have to deliver a chemical weapon to Homs, similar to those that Assad should have. The sums proposed are enormous.
Author Dr. Kevin Barrett, the same lies from Iraq, chemicals that don't exist. They're not even trying.
Americans have a terrible time even trying to imagine that their leaders could ever act in a less than morally upright way. And for this reason, Americans have been repeatedly victimized by leaders who have done all sorts of terrible things to America and American democracy, as well as to other countries.
Trick 2. We're not racist, but Iran is suing Argo director Ben Affleck. It wants to show CIA documents ordering this flick to prepare American hearts and minds to bomb Iran.
These creatures cannot be considered human.
Kevin Barrett, you know Iranians are portrayed like zombies from Dawn of the Dead here, but could the CIA really control Hollywood?
Yes, of course, this may sound like a crazy conspiracy theory to people who are exposed on a regular basis to Fox News and CNN and the New York Times, which never talk about these things. But the CIA has been propagandizing the American people through the U.S. media since World War II. There's a whole department of the CIA called Operation Mockingbird. They may have changed the name, but I'm sure it's still around. Operation Mockingbird is that operation in the CIA that is aimed at dominating the media. There were, I forget, 600-700 fairly high-level and influential CIA assets getting paid by the CIA in the media. And so it's not surprising that many news articles and Hollywood movies are intelligence operations.
David Swanson, author of War is a Lie, but how can a film be a war crime?
Well, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights makes it illegal to engage in war propaganda. People who have billion-dollar media industries at their fingertips are not supposed to be pushing war propaganda, and that's what Argo is, and more effectively because it's not recognized as such. But it's packed full of lies. It depicts Iranians as mad, vicious, subhuman animals. One that you cited earlier of putting out false information about threats from foreign nations through selected misleading leaks out of the government and then broadcasting those through all the media as if they've been created by independent reporting. This is done through cooperation with the New York Times and other key media outlets with the chemical weapons or the aluminum tubes and so forth. I mean, this is intentionally false and misleading information aimed at beginning a war. That is war propaganda. That is what is banned under international convention.
Trick 3. We're invading to help. Hundreds of women and babies at My Lai were gang raped, tortured, then murdered by US troops. New book, Kill Anything That Moves, finds America's army committed My Lai massacres every month. Former Marine James Fetzer, we see regular atrocities in Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan. Is Kill Anything That Moves still policy?
I have no doubt about it. As a former Marine Corps officer who, however, did not serve in Vietnam, the policy was the practice, kill anything that moves. I have no doubt that's continued in Iraq and Afghanistan, no doubt at all.
Reuters reports US-trained proxies in Syria raping and killing women and children. 3,000 tons of weapons recently airlifted to Syrian terrorists. America's training Iran's Mujahideen-e-Halq, terrorists killing thousands of Iranians and Americans. Investigative reporter Madison Rupert, thanks for joining us. Who's the threat here?
We see the delisting of the MEK here in the United States, the Iranian opposition group. We saw mainstream reports of them actually being trained for operations in Iran, in the United States. So, and this was when they were still listed as a terrorist organization. So the West is really the one threatening here, along with Israel, of course.
Bomb Iran. Bum, bum, bum.
America's single justification, repeated again and again in Chinese whispers, is a deliberately falsified quote. In fact, Iran's president called for, quote, the occupiers of Jerusalem, Israel's occupation of Palestine, the UN rules illegal, to face, quote, regime change, exactly what the US calls for throughout the world. The oil-rich Muslim world in controllable micro-states is the grand plan, says a leak from Friends of Syria talks, confirmed by top generals and politicians in Kuwait, Pakistan and Turkey. Kevin Barrett, how does the plan work?
Iraq is now broken up into a largely Shiite south, a shrinking Sunni middle. Many of the Sunnis have become refugees and left the country, and then an Israeli-occupied Kurdish north. And likewise, Sudan has been broken up into two pieces, the so-called Arab north and an Israeli-occupied south, which is where all the energy resources are. Interestingly, the Israelis always seem to grab wherever the energy resources are. They own the South Sudan and they own Kurdistan in Iraq. So Libya has been broken up into a Salafi east and a Gaddafi-supporting west. So that's the strategy, is to break up all these countries. And Syria would be the icing on the cake.
Yeah, Al-Qaeda zapping Israel's enemies one by one. How strange.
And the one country it never attacks, ever, is Israel. So this leads you to wonder, what the heck is going on? You know, what kind of radical Islamic group is this that smuggles drugs and never attacks Israel? And whatever it does always seems to be in the interests of Israel. I think they've created a brand with Al-Qaeda that is designed to siphon off anger in the Arab and Muslim worlds.
So Iran's next. Who would win?
Well, first, the chances are that the war would not go well for the U.S. This has been wargamed to death. For instance, the Atlantic Monthly, which is a neocon publication serving the interests of Israel, actually spent a huge amount of money to do a very, very elaborate simulation of all of the possibilities for war with Iran. And the result was that Iran wins every time. I mean, the only way that Iran can lose, quote unquote, is if the U.S. essentially incinerates all their cities with nuclear bombs. Any other outcome is an Iranian victory. So it's a very, very bad war plan, unless, of course, you're a psychotic Israeli Likudnik like Netanyahu, and you would be perfectly happy to nuke, every Iranian city. But of course, that would be a war crime that would put the U.S. Out of its position as the leader of the world instantly. The whole world would be, just so disgusted by that. It would be the end of America's life as a world power.
America's new backdoor to war bill forces US to attack Iran if Israel decides. Just 2 congressmen voted against an anti-Iran resolution a few years back. They were Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich. Both just left office. David Swanson, you were Kucinich's press secretary. Is this backdoor to war the game changer?
To explicitly give a foreign nation that power to declare war is to push the momentum out of control, out of your hands. You can't take it back anymore. That would effectively give Israel the power to declare war on Iran for the United States. I mean, this is a step way beyond. This is giving war powers to a foreign nation.
Netanyahu's drive to get the public on his side with a threatening picture has gone viral. Even decision-makers in Washington do feel pressured by his threats. New Sec State Hagel fears, quote, Jewish intimidation, so people might be surprised who's the wolf.
I believe America must remain engaged for our own security, but I also believe the world is better for it. Some may disagree, but I believe America is exceptional, in part because we have shown a willingness, through the sacrifice of blood and treasure, to stand up not only for our own narrow self-interest, but for the interests of all.
My name's Daniel Bushell. The hidden truth about Hillary Clinton coming up.
War crimes mainstream media can't mention. The Benghazi ambassador's buried cable. And that infamous cackle explained.
From Mrs. Clinton's drone lust to crowing over murder.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
The head of the State Department has made America more hated and targeted in the world, for some nations, even more than George W. Hillary Clinton calls Mubarak a friend of the family. Enraged Egyptians hurl shoes, bottles and tomatoes at her bulletproof car and taunt her on Monica Lewinsky. She was met the same through Asia, Africa, and flag burning in Europe. US mainstream paints her as globally adored. Real surveys show the opposite. New York journalism professor Jeff Cohen, how does that happen?
Fox as a right-wing outlet and the other more liberal outlets, they all maintain this fiction about how well regarded the United States is throughout the world. So to point out that, you know, in many parts of the world, we're feared and hated. And we're feared and hated not necessarily because we have freedom of speech within the U.S. We're feared and hated because we've propped up dictators.
How does systematically being lied to damage America?
Our internal society is falling apart. You know, we have state after state in our 50 states that are in debt, and cities are going bankrupt. And our country spends 1/2 of the national government's discretionary budget is spent on the military. We don't have a real debate in this country about where all the money is going. You know, why do countries throughout Western Europe have free medical care and free college education, and we don't?
Media